This is an interview being conducted for the Oral History Project of the Shreveport Bar Foundation and the Louisiana Bar Foundation. We are interviewing Troy Bain on the 10th of December 2014 in Shreveport, Louisiana. Good afternoon, Mr. Bain.
Hello.
First, could you give us your full name and your date of birth?
Troy Evans Bain, September the 9th, 1936.
Can you tell us a little about your family history, your grandparents, parents, where you grew up, that sort of thing?
Well, I grew up in Vivian, Louisiana. My grandfather was a deputy sheriff up there, at least by the time I came along. My other grandfather was a Baptist preacher. He had been the Baptist preacher in Vivian, which is where my mother and father met and got married, and then later he was the preacher at Summer Grove Baptist Church. Then my father was born in 1913 and got out of high school around 1931. They didn't have any money. And I think my grandfather was on workman's compensation then. They all worked in the oil field. And I don't know what he was getting paid in 1931. When I started practicing, the weekly amount was $35 a week, which I don't know how people lived on that. But then my mother was the preacher's daughter. And as a matter of fact, the first 2 years of my life, I lived in the Baptist parsonage in Vivian, Louisiana.
Were both of your parents born in Vivian?
No, my mother was born in Timpson. No, she was born in Tennessee. It's Oakdale, Tennessee. Close to Oak Ridge, the atomic energy place, but Oakdale, Tennessee.
And what was your parents, what was your dad's occupation?
My father got out of high school and was hauling ice for practically nothing. He told me that he used to go to eat lunch and they'd get a bowl of chili and he'd eat half of it and then he'd fill the other half with ketchup. And so he got a bowl and a half for the price of a bowl. And he got a job working for the Standard Oil Company of Indiana at a small plant outside, about 3 miles south of Vivian. And he started out as a ditch digger and did painting work and everything you can imagine, but he ended up as a foreman. And then he got moved to Brownsville, Texas, where he really had a good job at a plant down there. He was over a major part of maintenance in the whole plant. And but he died at 54 of a heart attack.
So, while living in Brownsville?
No, that plant never could get running, and they moved him to Lafayette, where he ended up doing work on big compressors in the oil field.
But your formative years were in Vivian, and is that where you?
I was living in Vivian when I went to LSU, and I came home at Christmas of my freshman year, and they moved to Brownsville in January. So I spent a couple of summers down there, but yes, everything. Graduated from Vivian High School.
Tell me about your schooling at Vivian, elementary, and they probably didn't have a junior high in those days.
No, they hadn't first through 8th. Well, I think I ended up 26 out of 53 or 4 in my class. I liked math, I liked history, and I liked chemistry. And I did great in those. The others bored me. And I don't do well when I'm bored. So I wasn't exactly a so-called scholar in going through Vivian High School. But I did. I played football, basketball, and I was a pole vaulter on the track team. So
tell me about your football career and any famous opponents you might have played.
Well, as you know, I graduated from high school the same year. John David Crow was the halfback for Spring Hill High School, and I had the honor of tackling him he intercepted a pass I threw, and he was trying to jump away from another player and didn't see me coming. So, my claim to fame. But yeah, I played quarterback for Vivian. We had a pretty good team. I think we were 6-3 or 7-2.
Did you what did you do during the summer in those high school days? Were you working or playing baseball or both?
I always worked. I worked at the swimming pool as a lifeguard, and a couple of summers I did work in construction. I worked every summer from the beginning until I graduated from law school.
Where did you go to undergraduate school?
LSU.
And how did you decide to go to LSU?
You know, I never thought about going anywhere else. A lot of my friends were going to Tech, but they came home every weekend. As far as I know, they all came home practically every weekend. And I went over to visit with one of them one time, and I was there Friday afternoon when the campus just cleared out. And since I was going to get an engineering degree, Tech would have been a good place to go. I really couldn't tell you how I decided to do that.
Do you have any particular teachers or people like that who were important in your formative years?
You mean in
At Vivian?
at Vivian?
Yeah.
Not really. O.C. Sanders was the principal. He's kind of like, what was the principal over at Spring Hill? Cooper. He, very wise man, really liberal for his day. He was there when they integrated. He was the principal of North Caddo High. They closed Vivian by that time, but he had a big influence on me. But he only taught me one course.
Tell us about your undergraduate career.
Well, I had the devil for 2 years. I really had a hard time getting started. And another thing, a lot of things, one of the things people don't know about me is, and it's part of my law practice, it's kind of helped me. I'm a big gambler. I was real good at poker and real good at boo-ray. And so my last semester of my sophomore year, I spent a lot of time doing that. As a matter of fact, I made a net of $500 gambling that semester. Trouble is, my grades went kaplunk. So I just gave it up. I've never gambled since then, except Penny Ante a couple of times when my wife and some of their friends wanted to play Penny Ante poker. But I'll jump forward to practicing law. I have a reputation of holding on to my money once I get it. But as far as a case goes, I've always been willing to doesn't bother me at all to roll the dice and go to trial. Whereas a lot of lawyers, and lawyers associated me in cases, you get a certain offer, and as you well know in a personal injury case, you can get a whole lot more, but you can get zero. And when it gets to a certain level, they'd really get nervous wanting to settle. I just never cared for that. That just never bothered me. And when they reached a figure which I thought was okay, I'd go for it. But I never would go low unless my client insisted on it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't care. The money wasn't in my pocket yet, and I guess that's the gambler in me. I just didn't worry about it.
Talking about undergraduate school, I know your degree is in chemical engineering. How did you decide to pursue that course of study?
Well, I was good at math and the sciences. My father worked in a gasoline refinery. You know, I had no guidance whatsoever about what to do, so I just decided I'll be a chemical engineer, which was probably a mistake because that was a difficult course. I had 33 hours of chemistry, The engineering was hard enough, but the chemistry was, and I did well in all my courses. I ended up started making all A's just about after my junior year and after my last three. Took me 5 years, so my last 3 years. But that was hard. That was really hard. It was a lot harder than law school.
And your what was your extracurricular activities at LSU that you were involved in?
Well, I pole vaulted for 2 years, and I lettered at LSU in track as a pole vaulter. That sounds good, doesn't it? But
I won't ask you what you jumped.
if I jumped 12 feet.
Of course, you had an aluminum pole. You didn't have a fiberglass pole.
No, I had a Swedish steel pole.
I meant steel, not
Swedish steel.
Not, aluminum.
Aluminum was around then, but we weren't using it. No, I lettered because I was the only pole vaulter. So I got
Jimmy Andrews hadn't come around by that time?
Nope. We had a transfer student from California who could make 14.6, but he wasn't eligible yet. So, and that was my sophomore year, and I knew after that that was the end of me in track. But
what about any social activities?
well, I was a member of Kappa Sig fraternity, and I was the president of the fraternity. And as I told you at lunch, there were two things available at that fraternity: all the partying and drinking that you wanted to do. There was somebody around that would do it. But then there were the people that could guide you and help you. And I don't know what I'd have done without it, frankly. I mean, my ability to socialize coming from Vivian and going to a school like that was sort of limited. So that was a real help to me.
Anyone in particular that you were close to that had an influence on you?
Well, my cousin from Vivian, Danny Kendrick, was a member of the fraternity. That's how I ended up being a Kappa Sig. And he was there 1 year. But no, not anyone in particular.
How about when did you decide to, or did you ever work as a chemical engineer?
The summer after my 4th year, I worked at the Standard Oil Company of New York. It's called Magnolia at the time. I worked at their gasoline refinery in Beaumont, Texas. Then the next summer, even though I knew I was going to law school, I worked as a chemist for the highway department. It was making pretty good money in those days, helping me pay my way through law school.
When did you decide to go to law school, and why?
Well, it never occurred to me in my wildest dreams when I started to be a law school, but somewhere as I went along, I began to see that maybe I didn't want to be an engineer. And one of the things, too, that summer I worked for the Standard Oil Company of New York. I did not like the corporate world. There were people who had to stay out there and work after hours because the main supervisors, the chemical engineers, would do it, and they were scared not to, and I just didn't like anything about that. So I took the test. I don't know, did they call it the LSAT then? And I guess I did okay on it. I don't even know what I did on it. I just remember when I registered for the first time, the person in front of me, Dean Hebert, was the dean, and they didn't have a chancellor, Paul Hebert. And the guy in front of me, he was trying to talk this guy out of going to law school. And I thought, oh my God, I've got a chemical engineering degree, and he's fixing to try to talk me out of going to law school. And he looked at my thing and my test score, and he said, "You'll do fine, Mr. Bain." And he said something to me, and I signed something, and there I went.
And how was law school?
It was easy. You had to study 3 or 4 hours a day when you were in chemical engineering. And a lot of my afternoons from 2 to 5 was taken up with labs. And you either, it was nothing for me to sit down and study from 6:30 to midnight, Monday through Thursday, Sunday through Thursday. But I went to law school and I didn't have any classes in the afternoon, or maybe a rare class, and I would go study for a couple of hours and I was through. And a lot of my classmates were up in the up in the library. They had a lounge up there for the students, arguing politics and things. I mean, they lived in there. And but everybody could be admitted then. I think we started with like 105, and either at the end of the first semester or the first year, we were down to 50-something. The rest of them were long gone.
What year did you finish law school?
62.
Any people or teachers that you were close to in law school, or the teachers that were an influence?
Well, Wex Malone was my tort teacher. He was really entertaining and very good, I thought. J. Denson Smith taught contracts, and he was. Did you take Denson Smith? Mm-hmm. Well, then you know his personality. I had the most embarrassing moment. At that time, they had a Baton Rouge Open, and Denson Smith was a big golfer, and they had the Baton Rouge Open, and Arnold Palmer had won it the year before, and Jack Nicklaus was just getting started. And so at the 9th hole, I was following them, and I went to get me a beer, and it was a long line. So I'm walking along with my beer, and the crowd goes wild. It turned out Palmer had made one of his wild, crazy shots, put it in the hole. But I started running, and I fell down, and I went through all kind of gyrations, trying to keep from spilling my beer, and ended up with one hand on the ground, and I looked up there, and there was J. Denson Smith looking at me, and he went, it made me feel like a complete fool.
And you finished law school in, what'd you say, 62?
62.
And then what did you do?
I got married the next weekend. And
to whom?
Catherine Conger, who grew up in a small farming community of Oak Ridge, about 300 people just north of Rayville. And she was teaching. She'd been teaching for 2 years. We dated 4 years.
You met her at LSU?
Mm-hmm, met her at LSU. And she was teaching, and I didn't have a job. I was expecting to be drafted, and I was waiting to see what was going to happen. And I got called for the draft physical, and they 4F'd me. This is September of 1962, and they weren't looking for anybody. I couldn't even apply to get in judge advocate. They wouldn't even take in the Air Force or the Army.
Had you done ROTC?
No, I hadn't done ROTC.
You'd done basic, I guess.
I'd done basic.
But not advanced.
But I was looking at going in as a private last class. And so while I was up here, I interviewed with a firm of Morgan, Baker, Skills, and Coleman, and they offered me a job. And we moved up here in November and started practicing law.
When did you take the bar exam? Or did you have to?
I didn't. I entered in September of 1959, and the Supreme Court passed a rule in October of 59. Prior to that, people had graduated from, I don't know, I guess all 4 of the Louisiana law schools. I just don't know, but certainly LSU and Tulane graduates did not have to take the bar exam, and I presume the other, Loyola and Southern, but I don't know. I guess well, things were different back then, so I'm not sure.
It could have very well been that
I'm not sure what
everybody.
happened to that rule, but I was my class was the last class that didn't have to take the bar exam.
Were any of your classmates people that you've remained in contact with or were close to?
Mainly Jim Dennis, who was subsequently on the Supreme Court and is now on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Some other people, but really not a lot of my law school classmates. Jim Franklin, I knew some. He was in my law class. But.
You mentioned your wife, Kay. Tell us about the rest of your family.
Well, we had 4 children. John, our oldest, he got killed in an automobile accident in 1986. And then we got Randy, who is the news director at Channel 3. He's kind of like the editor of a newspaper, except it's at a television station. My daughter, Catherine, went to LSU and then got a master's degree from the University of Virginia. She works for Bayer Pharmaceuticals. She lives in Berlin right now. She moved to Berlin in July of this year. And my daughter, Debbie, got a PhD, and she went to Stanford undergraduate and went to Cal Berkeley for graduate school. And she works for a research group associated with the University of California Medical School in San Francisco. Yet she lives in Haley, Idaho. She is able to do
What was her PhD in?
public health with a specialty in epidemiology and statistics.
And your daughter who lives in Berlin, what's her education?
Well, she got
Oh, you told me a master's.
a master's from University of Virginia.
In
It's one of the medical. It wasn't physical therapy. It was one of the medical degrees, and I can't think of the name of it right now.
And so, how did she get start working for Bayer?
Lucky, real lucky, because she ended up in Denver, and the jobs in her field were rehabilitation, primarily of heart patients and so forth. But they didn't pay much money. And a friend of hers was working for Bayer, was leaving, and recommended her, and she got a job with Bayer, calling on neurologist in Denver. And then they moved her to New Jersey, and the home office in the United States of Bayer, where she taught salesmen. And now they've moved her to Berlin, where it's kind of complicated, but she's doing the same thing on a little higher level.
You have grandchildren?
Jackson, who is Randy's son, he's 12, and Layla and Charlotte, which are 8 and 6, who are Debbie's children, live in Haley, Idaho.
No lawyers in your family?
No lawyers.
Either going up or coming down, huh?
Either way.
Did you know any lawyers growing up?
Jasper K. Smith, who was a lawyer in Vivian.
And a state senator?
State representative.
State representative? Okay. Okay, you mentioned that your first job was with Morgan, was it Morgan?
Morgan, Baker, Skills, and Coleman.
Okay.
Turner Morgan had been the senior partner, and he died about 6 months before I came, which is the reason they were looking for somebody. They had an overload of work.
Was Judge Turner in that firm?
No.
That's a different one. Okay.
No, he wasn't related to. No, it was Morgan, Turner Morgan.
Okay. And what did you do for them?
Well, actually, I just did research and was a gopher for Ado Skills, and I was very unhappy. I started for $500 a month. That was my opening salary, and I was there 3 years, and when I left, I was making $900 a month. Moving up in the
Almost
world.
double. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, when you start low, it's it's a lot easier, and I was miserable. By the end of a year, I bet I talked to practically every firm in the city of Shreveport trying to make a change. But I did have one interesting story in there. My first trial. We were representing a company called Universal CIT, which made loans on various things. And they had made a loan. This fellow was building a house, and he didn't quite have enough money to finance everything through the mortgage company. So he financed his air conditioning through Universal CIT Credit Corporation. Well, he didn't pay, so I sued. So we're going to trial. And I, in my obsessive compulsive way, got everything ready for trial. And the guy from Universal CIT helped contact the contractor who put in the air conditioning, and and I had to have him to show there was an agreement and all this sort of stuff. So they sent the fellow from the contractor down the day before, and I went over it all with him, and I was all prepared and ready to go. First trial. So we start the trial, and fortunately we started it about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we do some preliminary work, and I put this guy from the contractor on. And I start asking him the questions to prove the contract. Well, Neil Dixon was defending it. That was Judge Dixon's brother. And he started objecting that what the guy was testing to was hearsay. And I said, I was puzzled. And I asked him 3 or 4 questions, and all of them were objected to as hearsay, and there was a little bit of a muddle there. And finally I learned that the contractor, had sent one of his people who didn't know a thing about the deal, not one thing. He only knew what the contractor was had told him. The greatest thing I did during that trial was drag that thing out until 5 o'clock. And I got home. To say I was upset is very limited. But
How much sleep did you get that night?
I can't remember, but probably none. But I got the contractor on the phone, and I threatened him with his life, probably. I don't remember what I told him. But the next morning, about an hour and a half before the trial started, he was there. And I got through there and I got my judgment. But
Who was the judge?
I believe it was Flanagan, which probably helped me some too, but I'm not sure. But that was...
Did you do any personal injury work those first 3 years?
No. I had one case I remember I settled. Just one case I remember I settled. And I got $1,000, and I thought, gosh, this is great. I was making $500 or $600 or $700 a month. I remember, do you remember there was a lawyer here named Graham Rogers?
Sure.
And Bill Lynch, they were partners. But Graham got a judgment during those 3 years for $100,000. And that was a ton of money to get in a personal injury case. I can't remember if it was a judgment or a settlement, but it was the talk of the town that he got a settlement or a judgment won for $100,000.
After you'd been there 3 years, where did you find another place to ply your trade?
Well, I made a big mistake. I'd gone to law school with Jack Fent, who was the mayor's son and who was in law school with me. And he joined a firm with Judge Hendricks, who'd been on the bench, the city bench, for 30 years prior to that time. And and Fred Sexton had joined that firm. Well, I was so anxious to get out of where I was, I made an agreement with the deal. They had 4 firms when I was there. Judge Hendricks, that was all the cases that came while Judge Hendricks was practicing by himself. And he got all the fees off of that. Hendricks and Fant, same thing. Hendrick, Fant, and Sexton, same thing. So it took me quite a while to catch up. I didn't make much money the first 2 years, and but it went from being a gopher to I was in complete and absolute by myself practicing law. Because Judge Hendricks was all right, but if he'd ever known any law, he'd forgotten it by that time. 30 years on the city bench, and of course
The years on the city bench would have done it to him, wouldn't it?
Yeah, probably so. It was just well, I'll tell you a story one time. I found out after I left there, I knew Judge Hendricks used to go to a lot of funerals. I mean, he was constantly going to funerals. And somebody told me years later that while he was at the funeral or so forth, or the visitation, he'd go to the widow or widower and tell him, come on down to my office Monday or Tuesday or whenever, and I'll help you, we'll get your succession put together. I had no idea he was doing that. But somebody told me this story one time. Judge Hendricks came over to Judge John Dixon's office to get a succession signed. And somebody was in the office that told me this story. I can't even tell you who it was, but Judge Dixon saw Judge Hendricks out there, and he said, come on in, Ruvian. His name was Ruvian. What you got? And he said, I got a succession. And Hendricks said, well, and Dixon said, did you do this or did Troy do it? And he said, Troy did. And he said, well, okay, I'll sign it. And he signed it immediately. But yeah, that was something of an experience. But 2 things happened during that period. I tried a personal injury case in front of Judge Flanagan. And I thought the minimum award should have been $2,500 for general damages plus special damages. So he ruled in my favor, and he said, and I award damages of $2,500. I said, okay. I said, Judge Flanagan, you meant $2,500 plus specials, didn't you? He said, nope, $2,500 total. Well, that brought my general damages down to, I think, less than $1,000, like $900 and something dollars. So I said, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I'm going to start juries. And I started doing jury trials. And they came out great. That's really what got me really off.
Was anybody doing jury trials but at that time? Was Don Miller doing them, or just had he started doing them?
Don Miller was doing a few. And but at that time, practically no one in Shreveport was doing any jury trials except Don. Now,
not even Mr. Booth or Leonard Lockhart or.
No. I can't say for sure. I know they did some in federal court. They did some jury work in federal court. But as far as state court went, everybody was doing jury trials. So I decided to try one, and went up against Wilton Williams, who, did you know Wilton?
Sure.
And
Sidney Cook said Wilton Williams always kept a flashlight with him because he wanted to keep everybody in the dark, and he would be the only one to have a light to know what was going on.
Fairly accurate, but my first case was a guy who had had his leg amputated because of cancer, and the cancer had done fine. I mean, he didn't have any problem with cancer. But it was just a simple rear end case. And that jury gave me $30,000 plus expenses. I was delighted. I said, that case wasn't too much different from where Judge Flanagan had gave me $2,500. So
Did you keep it? Did it go to the Court of Appeal?
I kept it. Yeah. Yeah. And that had to be in the mid-'60s. And I was very fortunate, but I didn't lose a jury trial until either the late 80s or the early 90s. I can attest to the fact that up until somewhere around 1990, give or take a few years, the jurors were totally different. And something happened really, and they really started changing a lot. And I think a lot of people have noticed that phenomena. The American trial lawyers especially have given seminar after seminar on how to handle hostile juries. And they say that all this started in the mid-'90s.
And caused by what? The pendulum had swung too far, maybe?
Well, a lot of it, no one has ever explained to me the relationship. But that's about time the Newt Gingrich revolution came along in Congress. Mm-hmm. And some people blame it on that. Some people blame it on insurance advertising. Some people blame it on lobby and all of their stuff. But lobby got started in 1976, and nothing they did had any impact until sometime in the 90s. So that changed things a lot.
So you really started your personal injury practice while you were with the Rubian, Hendricks et al.
Right, and because I was doing a jury trial, that's what Booth Lockhart came along and offered me a job. Just called me up, and I went over there, and they asked me if I was interested, and we interviewed, and they gave me a job. I walked out of there.
What year was that?
1970.
1970?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I went over there in February of 1970.
And who was there then?
Oh, Harry Booth, Whitfield Jack, Jim Reeder, Hank Politz, Joe Lesage, John Pleasant, me, Jim Boland, and Herman Sockrider.
You left out Leonard Lockhart.
Leonard Lockhart, that's right. I was going down the hall, and I went right by him. Mr. Booth had the first office, Mr. Lockhart the second, and so forth. Yeah, Leonard Lockhart, who was really, Leonard gave me all his cases. I never was much for getting in a lot of clients, but so most of my money that I've made has come from being associated with other lawyers in cases. I never had that get the business, but there's two things that happened during that period that sort of help identify me. One of them was changing to those jury trials, because most people thought I was crazy. People just weren't doing it at that time.
Were they scared of the jury cost if they lost, or what was the motivation? Or the Court of Appeals going to reverse, or a combination of those two?
I think it was more the Court of Appeals that was going to do it. But I was representing a fella, his name was Harold Strain. I'll never forget that name. And Harold had a wife, and he was going to move to, I was representing him in an offshore case. He was going to move to Metairie, and his wife and his family left early. Well, Harold had a girlfriend. He had two girlfriends. One was his children's music teacher, who, while his family was gone, loaned him a TV and a vacuum cleaner and something else. And the other one was a young woman that worked for Swepco. So Harold went over to Texas and married this woman that worked for Swepco.
So now he had 2 wives and 1 girlfriend, huh?
Yes. Well, he was driving the car of the music teacher, the second girlfriend.
I see why you'd never forget this case.
So they get through at their honeymoon over in Texas, and he comes.
Did he
back.
drive? Was he driving
He was driving. He was driving the music teacher's car
for his honeymoon?
for his honeymoon.
He must have been a persuasive fellow.
Well, I asked him one time why in the world he did it, and he said, well, we were sitting at the kitchen table, he and his second wife, and we were drinking coffee, and we drank coffee, and she wanted to get married, and she wanted to get married, and so I just couldn't do anything else. So we went over there and got married. Well, by the time by the time they finished their honeymoon, he brought his second wife home to where she'd been living, I think with her parents, and said he had to go on a business trip and he'd be back in a week. Well, she began to feel like something was suspicious by this time. So she wrote down the license plate number on the car. Well, when he didn't come back, I guess she went down to the DA's office. And I don't know, any event, she got the identification, she put the license plate and the music teacher together. And when she and the music teacher got together, it was bad news. And Harold got arrested. Of course, since I was representing him, I had to represent him. So we had a trial before Judge Willie Woods. And he was real good. There was a guy named Albert Lutz who was the first assistant district attorney. And they tried to get Texas to prosecute Harold for bigamy, which they should have done. But they said, I believe it was over in Wascom, they say, all you people come over here and bring your stuff over here and get married over here, and we're not having anything to do with it. So Albert was on a real tear. So he charged him with, it wasn't theft, something of movable property, use of movable.
Taking the car? Unauthorized use of
movable.
Yeah.
And he filed it in 2 different charges. One was the car, and the other was the vacuum cleaner and the TV. So we go to trial on the car. And he starts putting in evidence of the bigamy. And I started raising Cain. I objected. I mean, he tried the entire bigamy case.
Was it to a bench trial or was it a jury trial?
Bench trial. It was a misdemeanor. And he just kept on and on and on. And so we got to the end of that case, and Judge Woods declared him not guilty. And I was shocked at that, but then I was to learn why I was shocked. So we went to trial on the, and I don't believe we had a court reporter in a misdemeanor in those days. It had never occurred to me to get a court reporter. So I go to trial on the vacuum cleaner and the TV set, and it's just as clean as a hound's tooth. I didn't have an objection I could make. And he found him guilty.
Same judge?
Yep. We tried them back to back. I think it was all on the same day, I'm almost sure. Well, I lost it. I filed a writ of habeas corpus in Judge Dawkins' federal court and claimed it was basically a kangaroo court. I never will forget, I went up one day to get an order signed just a few days after I had filed that, and I went in Judge Alexander's office, and he was sitting there reading my federal court petition. And I asked him, what's this? And he said, well, Willie's pretty upset about this, what you've alleged in here. I said, well, it's all the truth. So to get out of Alexander's office, I had to go by Judge Woods' office. And Judge Woods called me in and essentially threatened me with contempt. So I went on that night. I was in the Giddens Lane building. And I remember I started trying to come up with an amended petition to try to remove Judge Woods' things that he threatened me with contempt. And it got to be about 10 o'clock, and I had changed it. I'd done everything, but it didn't make any difference. So I threw it in the trash can and said, to hell with it. So Judge Dawkins ruled I had to exhaust remedies. So I took an appeal to the Supreme Court. Lost that, came back, lost it to Dawkins, went to the Fifth Circuit, lost that, and I took a writ to the United States Supreme Court. Well, I lost all of them. I guess they thought I was as crazy as a as a loon, you know. I never will forget at the United States Supreme Court, and you know I had to jump through a lot of hoops to do all that stuff.
Yeah, you sure did.
And had to do a lot of work.
Probably getting admitted to the Supreme Court was something you had to do, I imagine, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had to get admitted to the United States Supreme Court. And Judge Dawkins, by the way, was very favorable to me. But that was the time when the Warren Court was adopting all of the Bill of Rights and applying it to the states. And I can't remember, I read every case from the United States Supreme Court, beginning with the original one, and I can't remember what it was. One of them was Gideons versus Wainwright. Prior to Gideons versus Wainwright, you didn't get appointed an attorney unless you were subject to a penalty of 20 years or more in Louisiana. And I did a tremendous amount of work on that. And, you know, that was kind of crazy, but I'll tell you one thing. After that, I got a lot of respect out of lawyers who never had paid any attention to me. Yeah. Seemed to think, what is he? but it looked like it was better not to cross me too much in a bad way. As a matter of fact, one of the things that happened somewhere during then, I walked in Judge Flanagan's office, and he told me he'd heard about the fact that what had happened with Willie and what I'd done to Willie, and he didn't approve of all that. He didn't ever want me to, better not ever do that to him. And I told Flanagan, I said, I'll tell you what, Judge Flanagan, if you ever do what Judge Woods did to me, I'm going to do the same thing to you. Do you remember Judge Flanagan?
Sure.
He said, mighty fine, and and I walked out of there, and I didn't ever hear anything from any other judges after that. But that was kind of that tells you something about me. I don't know what it tells you, but it tells you something.
What happened in your personal injury case for Harold?
Oh, I settled it for a pretty good fee, but not nearly. Total hours, I probably made about $10 an hour.
You said there was another case that was particularly noteworthy about learning about you.
No, I was.
Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, no, it wasn't any. That particular case. Now the jury trial, starting on the jury trial, completely changed everything for me. And got me a job with Booth Lockhart, which turned out to be.
Well, tell us about Booth Lockhart at that time, because it was an unusual law firm as far as it looks like to me. It was very unusual.
Yeah, it really was.
In a good way. No, I'm not. There was a tremendous group of people there, and they were highly successful. At least my understanding, anyway.
They had been. It had been started by Harry Booth and Leonard Lockhart. And Leonard Lockard was a graduate of Ole Miss and went to Ole Miss Law School. Harry Booth had I don't know if he got a college degree or not. He passed the bar, which you could do in those
He
days.
read law.
Yeah, you didn't have to go. He didn't go to law school. Leonard Lockard's. He was apparently, I never saw him. By the time I got there, he was in pretty ill health and so forth. And so I never saw him try a case, but he must have been magnificent in the courtroom. Leonard Lockard used to say of him, if he knew any law at all, he'd be dangerous. And Lockard knew all the law.
Uh-huh.
And Lockard was a good lawyer, trial lawyer, but Harry Booth was the one. And then Whitfield Jack was a sort of controversial character who had a great reputation as a lawyer. He just worked cases to death. He used to sit in his office and write out legal pads, just getting ready for a case, just amazing.
Were you involved at all with the Mansfield hardwood lumber case, or did that start before you got to Booth Lockard? No, that's not right, because it was Mr. Madison that handled that, but it had been turned down by Whitfield Jack.
Well, Lockard had a lawyer friend up in Texarkana, and the people who ended up being the plaintiffs in the Mansfield Hardwood Lumber Company case came, he sent him to see Lockard, but he didn't call Lockard ahead of time. So he walked in the office, and the clients come walking in the office, and Lockard wasn't there. And as was Whitfield's habit, if there was somebody sitting out in the lobby, which he could see from his office, and wasn't being taken care of, he'd go out there and talk to him. So he went out there and told him he'd talk to him. So he brought him into the office and talked to him. Now, Lockard's story was, I'm getting a little out of court, that a lot of the defendants in the Mansfield Hardwood Lumber Company case were buddies of Whitfield Jack. Well, in any event, Whitfield turned it down.
We might ought to explain just briefly what the Mansfield Hardwood Lumber Company case was and how noteworthy it was for Shreveport.
Right. And well, I'll do that in a second. And the case got started. What had happened was the principals of the Mansfield Hardwood Lumber Company, the people who ran it, went around and told all of the other owners, the people who weren't involved,
Minority shareholders.
right, that the business was not doing any good. No, I'm sorry, that the business was not doing good, and they were going to have to expand it, and they were going to have to put up thousands or hundreds, this is an old case, so probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or they could sell to them, sell out. I forget the figures, but it seems like to me they paid, and there was a lot of shares, something like $200 or $300 a share. Well, as soon as they got all the stock in their hands, they just sold it all. And it made about $2,000 a share. So the difference was something like $1,700 a share. Judge Dawkins, in the only case that stands for it, I had occasion to research this one time. Judge Dawkins held that they had committed fraud even though it was a promise to do something in the future. Fifth Circuit reversed him on that and said it was a violation of a fiduciary duty. But in any event, somewhere in the middle of that, Lockard called a lawyer up in Texarkana to talk to him about something. The lawyer was mad at him. He said, because that lawyer thought he was going to get part of the fee if Lockard had taken the case. And Lockard said, the lawyer said, why in the world you turn the case down? Lockard said, I don't know what you're talking about. So Lockard went out and began to investigate. Whereupon he found out what happened. He was not a happy camper. So, yeah, that was quite an event. A little friction within the firm.
You might, if you remember, the incident that happened down in Hodge when Mr. Lockard and you and Mr. Lockard went down there to inspect the scene of the accident involving the sulfuric acid hose that failed.
Yeah, that was the Kennan case where the clients were working for the railroad, and the railroad happened to be going by when, you know the facts, when an acid hose burst and sprayed acid all over. It turns out somebody had used rubber hosed, flexible rubber hose. But yeah, well, you were in the car, weren't you?
I was there. I saw it with you, but I want tell them about it because I think it's hilarious.
Well, we were driving.
And also that it was Mr. Henry involved, who was
Bubba
Henry's father.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, he was driving the car,
Right,
wasn't he? He was taking us through, and we've been talking about acid this, acid that, and there was this huge puddle. I suppose it was water. So Mr. Henry just drove right into it. Well, it was deep, and Lockard got excited. He thought it was acid. I can't remember. What did he do?
He couldn't get out of the car.
Couldn't get out of the car
because the water was above the floorboard of the car. And Mr. Henry couldn't get out either, so they had to call somebody to get one of those winch trucks to winch him out because.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I guess that was, that was one of Lockard's cases.
Yeah, that was a Ramsey.
Was that a Rams case?
Yeah.
Yeah, railroad.
Because Bobby Robinson was if you remember what Judge Dawkins did in that case, that was pretty noteworthy. When he granted a summary judgment in your favor during the trial directed verdict. Before I had got to put on any evidence.
That's right. He did that, and I thought, what do I do now?
What do you think I was thinking?
Well,
it really helped my case a little bit.
Well, you were thinking immediately that this was not good for you. I was thinking on having to try this case twice.
Well, I was also thinking there was an argument that this wasn't right, that you couldn't grant a directed verdict for the plaintiff without the defendant having a chance to put on any evidence.
Well, you can't.
That didn't seem right to me. Okay, but that case would have never gotten settled but for Bobby Robinson. You'd have never settled it, would you?
No, I didn't want to settle that case, and but that's the way it went, and that's what that's what I'm telling you about the gambler.
Yeah.
And we don't know how much Ramsey was involved in that.
Yeah.
It turned out that.
I mean, we paid a lot of money in those days, but
yeah.
But heck, that was a home run or potential home run deal.
Well, after Bobby left, I began to have to deal with Mr. Ramsey. And he was not a pleasant man to deal with, and he was not the kind of person that I wanted to be associated with. Mm-hmm. And he more likely than not was behind whatever Bobby was doing. But I couldn't tell you that for sure.
Yeah.
But he wanted the money quickly, and when some money got on the table, he wanted it, and he didn't have any other gambler in him, as I say. But yeah.
All right, tell us about you. You left Booth Lockard, and if you would like to tell us about what happened to Booth Lockard in that time frame, and then your career thereafter.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want